Welcome to the PEEP podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Maroc, and on this episode, we're talking about astrology. Before we get into our conversation with Cynthia McNulty of Essential Zodiac, I have an announcement to make. My first confirmed live but virtual talk of the spooky season is scheduled. On October 7th of 2021, I'll be joining the monthly meeting of the Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship via Zoom. I rarely do speaking engagements solo, so this one will be special. The title of my talk is Evolution of a Ghost Hunter from Fear to Fascination, with Ghost Hunter in quotes. It's kind of a misnomer, but it's a popular title I've come to accept for myself as a paranormal investigator. My presentation will cover some of my childhood experiences, stories of some of my more interesting public and private investigations with the National Society of Paranormal Investigation and Research, also known as INSPIRE, and how my perspective about the paranormal has evolved through the years. The link for more information and details on how to get tickets is in the show notes. Now back to our fascinating topic for this episode, astrology. If you're anything like me, you might be fascinated with all things that fall under the New Age category, astrology, numerology, tarot, etc. I've bought books on many of those subjects over the years, but because astrology always seemed too complicated for me, I bypassed those books in the bookstores. Still, I've always had questions about how it's supposed to work, whether there's actual science behind it, and why those horoscopes in the daily newspapers or online are sometimes accurate for me and sometimes totally irrelevant to my day. A few weeks ago, I met Cynthia McNulty at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo in Raleigh. And out of that deep-seated curiosity, I decided to purchase the special she was offering that day, a natal chart and 3 months of my own personal monthly transit forecast, which most of us would call a horoscope. When we had our Zoom meeting to discuss my chart, she was able to explain astrology in such a way that it answered many of my questions. So I asked her to join me on the podcast for a conversation. Cynthia McNulty has always had a lifelong interest in astrology. She began her studies 25 years ago from the Online College of Astrology, now the International Academy of Astrology and the American Federation of Astrologers. Since 1998, Cynthia has been a practitioner in the Western Mysteries tradition and a student of Kabbalah. These practices give her a unique insight into her astrological interpretations. Cynthia is a member in good standing of the American Federation of Astrologers, the Organization for Professional Astrology, and the International Society for Astrological Research. Let's dive in with Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm great, Nicole. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I so appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule to talk to us about the zodiac and horoscopes and astrology.
Right.
It's something that I've always been interested in, but never, it's one of the few things that are kind of in the new age realm that I haven't really dabbled in. So it's even more interesting to me because I haven't tried it out.
Right.
But, yeah. So I have a lot of questions.
Starting in the 70s, it came back into, social, the social realm, what's your sign and all that.
So what actually got you started in astrology?
It's a funny story. My godmother, my mother's sister, I was very close to. And, she had kids my age, and I was an only child for a long time. So, especially in the summer, I would spend some time with her play with my cousins and gave my mom a break, and it was nice. And my Aunt Trudy was her name, was kind of ahead of her time. I mean, she was this is in the 60s, and she was into vitamins, health food. She probably was one of the first subscribers for Prevention Magazine.
Wow.
Which is around to this day, but I remember it. So, and one of the things that she was interested in was astrology. And back then there were the astrology daily column, in the local paper.
Mm-hmm.
And her and I are only 2 days apart. We're both Leos. We were both born in July. And I can remember every morning sitting there with my cousins, eating our cereal, and my aunt would talk about our horoscopes for the day, and she'd get real excited with me. Oh, we're gonna have a great day. We're Leos. We're gonna have a great day. And she was funny. Now, she did all this health stuff, but she drank black coffee and smoked like chimney, Lucky Strike. So, I mean, she lived well into her 80s, so she was doing something right. And, it was always something that, was kind of in the back of my mind. As I got older, I would check my horoscope myself and all that. And we would talk about it a little bit. And she never got into charts or whatever, but she was pretty good about picking out someone's sun sign. She'd be like, oh, they're a Taurus or they're an Aries. And, 9 times out of 10, she was pretty much on. So, life goes on. I get married, have kids, and astrology is like kind of always back there. But I really didn't do anything about it, I guess, until my late 30s, early 40s. I started really thinking about it more and wanting to know more. And, I used to get, Linda Goodman's sun sign book that used to come out, for, you can get it specifically for your sign, and all that. And, I was starting to seek out books. And then the internet came along. And that opened up a whole new world because, finding an astrology teacher is impossible, or was, I should say, impossible back then. The ones that were prominent, didn't take students, and, so when the internet came along, I found, I know they changed their name, but it was the Online College of Astrology. And they taught you Astrology 101, and, how all about the planets, the zodiac signs, how to do a chart, and all the ins and outs that you would need to be a professional astrologer. There used to also be a brick and mortar college called Kepler that was out in Seattle, and it was accredited. You could get, a bachelor's degree in astrology. Unfortunately, they lost their accreditation, maybe about 10 years ago now. The Washington State changed some criteria and they couldn't meet it. So but they still have a wealth of knowledge. They do things online, a lot of things online, but you can't, get the diploma. And so I would start doing charts for family and friends and, dabble here and dabble there. And the more I did it, the more I was like, I love this, I was a paralegal, was my day job. And so it was, quite quite the distraction to come home and do charts or talk to people. And, it was very different than the law.
Yeah.
And then my kids, grew up, went to college, graduated, got married. And I didn't need that security, of a, mainstream job, and I got a little bit of an inheritance. And my husband and I talked about it. And I said, if I don't do it, I'll never do it. And he's like, go for it. We're in good shape. Just go for it. See where this takes you. And that was 10 years ago. And I was able to make it my main, line of work. This is how I make my living now. And it's great because I love what I do. I meet great people. Every chart is different. Everybody's story is different. And it's very cool. So it's all thanks to my Aunt Trudy.
That's awesome. I love that you
Yeah.
have happy memories attached to the way it got started.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, she was a pistol. She really was. She said the beehive and the cat-eyed glasses, and one thing for sure, she was quite outspoken as well. So she was funny, but yeah, so that's how it all began.
So would you say being an outspoken person is kind of a Leo thing?
Oh yeah. We like our opinions to be heard and followed. We're kind of bossy. My rising sign is Pisces, and which is a water sign, and that kind of tempers the Leo fire. I always say I might bite your head off, but I'll feel bad about it later.
So before we really get into talking about the different signs and planetary movements and natal charts, could you give us kind of a brief history, if that's possible, with such a long history of astrology?
Yeah, this could be a study or a course in itself, but basically it started, the archaeologists have found that a form of astrology started around 4000 BC with the Sumerians. And basically it was a way for the ancients to make sense of their world. Mm-hmm. When you rely on the sun and it goes, and there's an eclipse, that's a very frightening, experience, right? Because you think your sun is going away. Or when the days grow shorter and colder, again, it's a frightening experience. And so they developed very advanced mathematics to figure this all out. And then as we became more civilized, which is, I put that in quotes because then the kings and the military came along, and the kings and the military wanted, they wanted information, before they invaded Greece, where the planets aligned for success.
Right.
And the astrologers, which were astrologers and astronomers, it used to be one single discipline, were the advisors. They would advise, the kings and the community. They were like the priests and the judges as well. They were the educated class, the upper class, if you would. So the beginnings of what we know as astrology started really with the Greeks. The Greeks gave it the mythology. Mm-hmm. They named the planets. They really gave it what we think of, astrology today. And it had an astrological heyday, if you would, in Greece, which is called the Hellenistic period. And there's a lot of astrologers that use that tradition in their work. It's very ancient, very traditional. It's a very interesting discipline. An astrologer that I'm very familiar with, I've heard him speak, Chris Brennan, is kind of an expert on this, and he's got some books out there. So if any of your listeners want to know about Greek astrology, look up Chris Brennan. So we have Alexander the Great, spreading, Greek culture throughout, the Mediterranean. And eventually we get to the Romans, who really didn't, approve of astrology, if you would, but they respected the Greeks for their education. So it continued along through the Romans. Then eventually we get through to the Middle Ages. Now you have to remember, now astrology and astronomy, you had, if you were a king, you had your own astrologer. John Dee is a very famous astrologer who was the astrologer for Elizabeth I. Mm-hmm. And if you've seen the movie, there's this awesome scene where Elizabeth I is consulting John Dee about the invasion of the Spanish Armada, because she's like, the famous line is, England will not fall while I'm on the throne. And what I love about that is, he advises her that England, will be victorious, but he has this great map on his floor, or the floor is of the constellations. And I keep telling my husband, I want that in my office, because it was just fabulous. It was just fabulous. But anyway, so then what happens is we get into the age of enlightenment and scientific revolution. People were finally accepting that the earth revolved around the sun, not, the sun around the earth. I mean, that got Galileo, if you remember your history, that got Galileo in a lot of trouble, but he was right. So what became treasured was that which could be explained. The astronomy part of astrology is tangible. Well, there's the moon, there's the sun, right? Where the astrology part of it is intangible, it's mystical, it's feelings. And that just didn't sit well. Also, what didn't sit well is the Christian church kind of wanted to control things. And, they were afraid that the more enlightened people got, that they would move away from the church. And, one could trace back a lot of the Protestant movement to being more aware. John Calvin, Martin Luther, all those Protestant branches that, Henry VIII, all the philosophers started during that period of time of the Age of Enlightenment. So astrology became something we didn't talk about. It went into the closet, if you would. I mean, people were still doing it, but it was a big secret. You would be branded a heretic if they caught you. So, that was execution. So everybody was very, 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 very careful. And then in the beginning of the 20th century, people, towards the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, people started looking at things from the other point of view. A lot of mystics, a lot of revivals of pagan religions came along. And I think it was in the 1950s that the witch laws were repealed in England, where if you could practice paganism and they wouldn't execute you anymore. And so, along with that, astrology also, creeped out of the closet, and people were starting to write books on it again. And then when we get into like the 60s and 70s, it was the age of Aquarius, what's your sign? You started seeing the horoscopes in the paper. Jean Dixon used to be on talk shows a lot. Uh, Linda Goodman was another one.
I remember Jean Dixon from when I was a child.
Yeah.
Linda Goodman rings a bell. And I know Reagan was
And
president in the 80s, but supposedly Nancy had an astrologer that she consulted
yes,
with.
Nancy Reagan. Oh, that caused a big kerfluffle. That was like, but yes, she did. And there's Linda Goodman used to do, like I said, the astrology books. I think she published through Dell. You would see them. But an interesting aside on Jean Dixon is she would do predictions. She was very much a predicative astrologer. And she was asked, I believe she passed away in the early 2000s, but she was, someone quoted her as saying that she couldn't see past, I think it was 2006 or whatever, and she passed away during that time. Yeah, it was very,
Huh.
very interesting. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, now, thanks to the bravery of a lot of the early astrologers, I could pursue my passion. And, we have some um, astrologers now who I want to say came of age in the 70s. There's like Robert Hand, Noel Tile, Demetra George. These are very prominent um, astrologers that I've heard speak at conventions, things like that. Because one thing about astrology, you never stop learning. I've been doing this a long time, and there's still things I find. I'm like, oh wow, that's an interesting way to look at things. So that's what I love about it too. There's always something new. There's a different opinion, to look at, and we have a lot of catching up to do because in the West here, astrology, like I said, was put on the back burner, but it thrived in India and Asia and all that. I mean, I've had the pleasure of meeting some, when I go to some of the conferences, they're international. And I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the Vedic is the Indian
Mm.
astrology. I've had the opportunity to meet other astrologers who have other points of view. And what I find interesting is like it's a family business. Like you have, the family doctor, the family lawyer. It's like there it's also in the family, like there's like astrologers in the family, like the mom and the grandmother and all that. And they have clients in this modern day that won't pick a wedding date without talking to their astrologer, or they want to have a baby, they'll talk to their astrologer. It fascinates me and makes me jealous because I mean, they have their challenges too, but it's like, wow, that would be great. I
Right.
could pass on the legacy, but but we're getting there. We're getting there. So it's encouraging.
Yeah. I I didn't even think about the fact that it could be taken that much more seriously in places like India and China. I knew China had its own version of the horoscope, but
Yes, yes.
yeah, that never occurred to me. So because astrology and astronomy kind of got separated along the way, would you consider astrology more of a science or an art?
I think it's an art. And my argument has always been that as astrologers, we should have an understanding of astronomy. Mm-hmm. But it used to be such a bad word because, astronomers, kicked us out of the club. So we're not going to play anymore, right? But you have to know some astronomy. You don't have to be, Carl Sagan, but you do have to, know what you're talking about. Because then you have to interpret what that means. So astrology is the interpretation. It is the art. It is the explanation of what is happening, So here is this physical thing, which is the eclipse. Now, what does that mean for us? When what kind of energy is being radiated from that eclipse? And it'll affect everybody differently because it'll affect your natal chart in different spots. So it might affect you in maybe your career. It may affect me, in my communication and things like that. So, my job then is to take the physical event. I take the event and make sense of it, which is what they did in the Babylonian times as well. Right. I'm doing the same thing. So not that I'm as great as the Babylonians, but I can hold my own.
Right, and you have software now to help you, right?
Yes. One of the things which my husband finds hysterical is there's math involved in astrology and astronomy, not my strong suit. My brain is the artistic side of things, where, I think left brain is the analytical, I think. So he's like a computer guy. So he's all, logical. I do know how to do it by hand, but now that I have software, I will not, because it's a lengthy process. And honestly, all kidding aside, a computer is better at math than I am. So, plus, what is interesting is the software program also takes into consideration daylight savings time. It takes into consideration now, it also takes into consideration when the time, so it's time changes throughout the world. Mm-hmm. But during World War II, especially in Europe, they had like war time, where they adjusted the clocks. I think they didn't want it, make it easy for Germany to bomb them. So if it was dark earlier and everybody inside and did the blackout curtains, it was harder to see. So the computer takes that into consideration as well. And I didn't know that, initially, I had learned about that later. And I'm like, but the computer does all that for me. But I take the information that the computer has spit out, and then I personalize it for you.
Okay. That makes total sense to me. I had you do my chart, and you asked about my birthplace and my time. and of course, birthday and year and all of that. So you put that into the computer and
Right.
it spits out the chart,
Exactly.
and then you interpret the chart.
And then, yes, and then, I take the chart and, I do my thing and I'm like, okay, this is for you. Your sun is what, Capricorn, I think, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've done a lot of charts today and they
I'm
all start
surprised you.
to blend together. And this is what this means for you. And your sun is in this particular house, and that's what that means. So the computer, and I don't know, honestly, I don't know any astrologer that does them by hand anymore. But the computer just makes it easy.
Yeah.
But the brain work is still mine.
Right. Right. And I imagine, just like anything else, you have to develop your own skills, and your interpretation of everything gets more honed the more you do it
Right.
and the more people you work with.
Right. And everybody has differences in their chart, even if you're born on the same day, because the planets constantly orbit. So if you're born in the morning, it's different than if you're born in the evening. Also, the rising sign, which is part of your personality, changes every 15 minutes. And the rising sign is the sign that rises on the eastern horizon, the moment you're born. So that's why an astrologer needs your birth time, because that starts the entire chart. I mean, that begins everything. And then, of course, location. People born here in the United States will have a different planetary configuration than someone born in Europe. People on the East Coast will have a different configuration than people on the West Coast. So that's the other reason. And of course, birth date is pretty much self-explanatory.
Right.
We have to know when you're born, that's number one.
Right.
That is number one. But I know it's like the bane of every astrologer's existence, because birth time is difficult. And also, depending on the age of your client, if there was a home birth, sometimes the day is completely different, because sometimes it's when the doctor got there to sign the birth certificate. So if there was a midwife involved and not a doctor, he had to, sign off on the birth certificate. So sometimes they just put the day he signed it. So you could have been born on the 2nd, but he didn't get there until the 4th. So your birthday now is the 4th. There's another issue is for people who have been adopted, because they necessarily don't get their original birth certificate, because there's all sorts of issues with secrecy, closed adoptions, especially, sometimes now you find more open adoptions, but years ago, they were all closed. Everything was a big secret. So you just had an adoption certificate that listed your birthday and all that, but there was no birth time.
Yeah.
And adoptees don't have access to their birth records unless there's websites and now that you can register. But, it's a shot in the dark. I have a few friends who are adopted, and, they'd love me to do their charts, but they have no clue. They have no idea who their birth family was or anything. And their parents were not present when their mother gave birth. So,
yeah. So in cases like that, or in cases where, the birth the actual birth date got moved because the doctor couldn't get there any sooner. Can you still do some semblance of a chart, or do you just say, no, I can't really help you?
Well, no. You try to do, you try to do some things. There is another computer program that does what we call rectification. And rectification is trying to determine the birth time. And it uses a series of algorithms. And I ask you to list important dates in your life. So, for example, we would start your birth date, because you know that. Yeah. Do you have siblings and their birth date? When did you enter school? When did you graduate high school? Did you get married? Do you have children? Did you divorce? There's a whole set of, did you receive any kind of awards? Did you have a serious illness? Were you in the hospital? Anything you can imagine. And what you do is you, with the dates that the answers provide, you plug this into the to the computer program, and it gives you a birth time. I did it on myself because I'm not going to do something because I know my birth time, right?
Right.
So, and I know the birth time for my children, right? So I did it, and it was off by a minute for me, and it was dead on for both my kids.
That's amazing.
It was. So if my clients are willing to go through the work, because it's like, it takes some time. It takes some time because I need at least 10 events, and more than 10 is great. And even if you think it's insignificant, put it down, because what this algorithm is doing, it's looking at what we call transits. And those are configurations between the planets. And they are significant and they mean different things. And I'm no computer guy, so I'm not explaining this really technically, but it takes all this information and it gives you a birth time. And then as the astrologer too, now sometimes if it gives you one or two, as the astrologer, you can look at what those rising signs are, and you can determine by talking to your client, looking at other pieces of their chart, looking at their personality, what that rising sign would probably be. It's as close as this person is ever going to get without having the birth time. And now hospitals are much better with recording, and it seems also parents are much better at knowing. I guess it's an interesting collective unconscious kind of thing where everybody is like, yeah, I know my birth time. I've been getting my younger clients, I would say from, my clients in their 40s downward know their birth time.
Yeah.
Know their birth time. My generation, I'm 60, has a little bit more trouble. And some people, it's going to be impossible for them because they don't even have living relatives that they could possibly ask.
Right.
So it can get complicated. That's the biggest frustration, because I do want to help. If you come to me and you want answers, I want to give them to you. Right. So that's a big frustration. So spread the word, get the birth time if you want, to make your astrologer happy.
Right. Get the birth time or document every important thing that happens in your life.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so question about the natal chart. You took all this information and you created this really cool looking chart.
Yeah, thank
And and then my question about it is it a is it something that like you look at it today and it's the same as if you looked at it 30 years ago and 30 years from now? Like, is it a forever thing, or is it just a snapshot in time based on what's going on, like when you make the chart?
Right. No, that will always be your natal chart,
Okay.
because it is a snapshot of time that's not going to change. You're not going to be born any other day,
Okay.
any other time, right? What does change is, as we age, our chart does go through some changes. And your natal chart is always going to be your foundation.
Okay.
You're always, going to have certain what I call default settings, about yourself. But then, things change. So every year you have what we call your solar return. And that's when your sun goes into the exact same position it was at when you were born. And it goes from, it's like your personal new year, and the energy lasts from birthday to birthday. And you use the same planets, the sun to Pluto, but the energy that is is generated is good for the year. So my clients like that as a planning tool. So, for example, if your sun is in your 10th house this year, that means your career is going to do well. That you're going to be very prominent. Maybe you'll get a promotion at work. So this is something to watch for. And on the other side, maybe if Saturn is in your 10th house, maybe you'll have some problems at work. Maybe your projects, because Saturn is our planet of restriction. Maybe your projects will get canceled, or, you'll have some obstacles in your work. So, you have to look out for them. And, not everything, of course, happens all at once. We're talking about a year.
Right.
So you have a year, but it's in your mind, it's something that now you can plan for, watch for, prepare for. If you're going to get a windfall, it'd be nice to know. I wouldn't say go out and buy the big boat or the house or the sports car, but pay attention, and once the money's in hand, then go. The other thing that astrologers can do as well is what we call a progressed chart. And your planets do move for every year that you're alive. Your planets do move around. And it's for every year, it's like 1 degree. But it also depends on the location of those planets in your natal chart. And so that changes things like my birth moon in my natal chart is Aquarius. And Aquarius is very humanitarian, looks for what's good for the community, but it can be aloof. Aquarius is more like, let me step back, review the information, and let me see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I noticed myself, I guess this is about 5 years ago, being a lot more emotional than normal. I'm not a crier, I'm a Leo. I'm not a crier. But those darn like Super Bowl commercials with the Budweiser puppy, I'm bawling like a baby, right? And I'm like, this is crazy, right? And of course, the shoemaker's kids have no shoes. Like the astrologer neglects her own stuff, right?
Right.
So I pull up my progress chart, and my moon had moved into Pisces. And Pisces is a water sign, Pisces is very empathic. If you have a friend who's a Pisces, they take the weight of the world on, right?
Right.
So, yeah. And so I'm like, well, this, now I'm stuck with this because it doesn't move that fast. So now I'm stuck with this moon I'm not used to. And I've got to figure out how to do it. And I'm like, Hallmark is another one that gets me, the Hallmark ones.
Right.
And my kids tease me because they're like, oh, this will get mom, she's going to be boo-hooing over, Alpo. So,
I've always been,
pardon?
I was going to say, I've always been like that. So just keep a box of tissues handy.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Take my Kleenex next, everywhere I go. But so those are the two ways that, a chart can change, it kind of, and also too, there's pieces in our natal chart that just change because we mature.
Mhm.
Like I always use the example where Mars can be a problem for some people with anger management. Well, you get to a certain age and you realize flying off the handle is not the way to do things.
Right.
You're not going to get what you want. So you change your behavior, modify your behavior. And so things that may or may not have been a problem, have now changed because you're mature. And I think we know too, I always say, sometimes we need to get angry. Sometimes people are, ignoring our boundaries or, whatever. We do need that anger, but now we're better able to use it properly.
Right.
But, and you can do lunar returns as well. People can do those monthly. And that helps if you're going through an emotional time. It's like every month you can kind of gauge where you're going to be until maybe your emotional world gets a little bit more stable. But so those are kind of like different charts that someone can do.
So looking at the chart that you did for me, I had notes. This isn't video, so I can't show how long it is, but it's pretty long and very detailed. And I was looking at it and I was writing in the margins little things like, wow, this is so me. And there were a few where I was like, nah, but maybe 20 years ago, this was me. So like you were talking about, you mature and some things can change.
Right.
But there was one that I'm looking for the exact words that I was like, holy crap.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Yeah, and I was going to ask how often people say that to you, like, oh my goodness, holy crap, how did you nail that? But I'm not going to find it because I'm looking for it.
Yeah.
But it was basically like your father wasn't around when you were a child, that kind of thing. And I was like, how did they know?
I know,
Because
right?
It wasn't that my dad was never around. He just didn't live with us because he was working jobs in other states. But that makes an impact on you when you're a kid.
Right. It probably had to do with Saturn.
Yes, I bet that's what it was.
Because Saturn represents Saturn. Sometimes the sun does, but mostly when it's an issue like your dad wasn't around kind of thing, it's usually Saturn because Saturn is a restriction. So Saturn represents male energy, father figure, father, grandfather, sometimes your mother. Like if in the case of a single parent, a single mom, she's both mom and dad. Right. So she takes on both roles. And then, the moon is more the feminine energy, so that would be your mother figure, someone like that. And it's just over and the centuries, it's like you know, in that collective unconscious, that when these things come together, this is what happens. So because Saturn has been subscribed the planet of restrictions and boundaries, this is what happens when we have this kind of configuration with Saturn. When we have Venus is a different kind of energy. Venus is sensual and kind of flirty, and very mellow and loving. Mm-hmm. And so when we have Venus in what's a good one? Venus in Libra. Venus rules Libra. You're going to have someone who's very mellow, very interested in being fair and equitable. They don't want to take sides. They want everybody to be equal. And it's just that for centuries, this is the kind of information everybody's been using. And it is proven time and time again that, this is what it's like. My own dad had his own business. So he worked a lot of late hours. Mm-hmm. And so he wasn't as present, but he wasn't as present as he could have been, sometimes. So my Saturn is very troublesome. It's very troublesome. It's got a couple of other things going on, but it also has like the father thing. So, but yeah, it takes people's breath away, because it's like, whoa, you nailed this on the head. But this is, that's the energy out there. And like, I always tell my clients, it's not an excuse to behave badly. Mm-hmm. It's now an understanding. Now you understand. So now we can be better. Right. We can't hide under our beds for 3 weeks while Mercury is in retrograde. We still have to work and, do things. So this is how we work with the energy that we have and that we're given. So my job is to help you, manage your life so you're not going crazy. It's like, well, here, you could do these things and you'll feel better. Mm-hmm.
So you brought up Mercury in retrograde, and that seems to be like the most popular excuse now. It's amazing. People I know who know nothing about astrology know that phrase at this point. Like, there's Facebook memes about it. Is Mercury in retrograde or something? Because nothing's going right today, that sort of thing.
Exactly. So, yeah. Well, the reason is Mercury goes retrograde 3 or 4 times a year. So that's why everybody knows it, because it's out there all the time. People talk about it. That's really like the only one they really talk of in popular culture is Mercury retrograde. And like you said, there's stuff on Facebook all the time. So Mercury retrograde scares people.
Yeah.
And I look at it this way so first of all, not the only planet, or planets, I should say, that don't go retrograde are the sun and the moon. All the other planets go retrograde. And what that is, it's an illusion. They are not orbiting backwards. It is the way they have aligned themselves between the earth and the sun. And it gives the illusion that they're going backwards. So, of course, the ancient astrologers thought they were going backwards. So, right. But what happens is their energy is changed. it's lessened or mitigated in some way. So it doesn't have the same oomph or the same power that it normally does. So, talking about Mercury, Mercury is our planet of communication. That is why your computer will go wacky, an email will go off somewhere else. people will People will misunderstand you. You might get into petty fights. It's all because the energy is disrupted. And it depends also what sign of the zodiac Mercury is in, what kind of, you know, issue is that going to cause. So Mercury, get your pens ready out there, everybody. Uh, Goes retrograde September 27th in Libra. And what that means is no one is going to be able to make up their minds. You're, and this is what I said, Mercury in retrograde is a do-over. So you can't do it doesn't help you to do new things because you're just going to have to redo them when Mercury goes direct. So this is my advice, is to redo, revise, rework. So for example, let's say you've had a project that just wasn't going anywhere. We'll pull that project out, look at it with fresh eyes, right? It's a great time to look at your resume. Do I need to, jazz it up a little bit? It's a good time to reach out to a friend you may have had words with, to reconnect. And especially with Libra, Libra is about relationships. Now, you may also, not you personally, Nicole, but in general, you could have someone from your past get in touch with you. So, Mercury will, Mercury retrograde will affect different people's area of life, depending into what house this goes into. So for me, it's going to be in my 7th house for 3 weeks, which means my relationships will need attention, and all sorts of relationships, business, romantic, best friends, things like that. So I have to keep an eye out and watch what I say, make sure I don't hurt, people's feelings.
Yeah.
And then, pardon?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, that's what you want to do with Mercury retrograde. You don't want to start a new project, but do the research for it. That's totally good. Like, whatever you're going to do the research for it. Don't get married because marriage is a contract and we don't want to sign contracts. However, though, if it's a remarriage, then I would say go for it. I had a friend who was divorced and remarried her ex. And it was during Mercury retrograde, and that was the key. I mean, they're great. They've been married 10 years now. So, there you go. So, so yeah, and Mercury will be for 3 weeks. So mid-October, I think it's around the 15th of October, it will go direct. But so for those 3 weeks, we'll have to think before we speak.
That's really, people should do that all year round. But it's hard for some of us.
Right. Well, yes. Very true. Very true.
Yeah. So it's interesting how it can, like, in general, it can affect people similarly. But then when you do like monthly horoscopes, like you did for me, for the listener, I bought a package that got a natal chart and 3 monthly horoscopes. And looking at the forecast for September, you do say it's broken down by almost weekly. So like the 6th, the 10th, the 14th, and on the 27th, Mercury retrograde in
Right.
Libra in my 10th house.
Mm-hmm.
And then you explain how it's really going to affect me based on my natal chart.
Right.
So that's how it can be useful.
Right. Yes, very much, because now you'll know and you'll prepare. Like, that transit report that I do, you could get it daily, you could get it monthly. The monthly hits all the important transits happening. And what I do is, put down all the important transits. And then I look as to how that they will affect you based on your birth information. And so, as you said, you're going to be affected in your 10th house. And as I said, I'm going to be affected in my 7th. And someone else, it could be the 2nd house, So it's important so you can plan. Again, this is all good for planning. Mm-hmm. So it gives us, I always feel like it gives us control. You know what's coming, so you could choose to do something about it or not, but at least you know what's coming, and It's not a big shock, so.
So I don't wake up on the 29th and go, is Mercury in retrograde or something? Because this is weird.
You'll know, not to sign any contracts and do your research instead of, although, like I said, life goes on. And like I said, you have to work with the energy you're given. So, but Mercury is the one that people always talk about. And it's really part of mainstream culture now. It's gotten that way. So I guess the other planets will follow. It'll be, the outer planets stay retrograde for a long time, like 6 months out of the year. So maybe we'll hear more about them too.
Right. Pluto really wants to be back in the spotlight.
Yes.
Poor Pluto.
Yes. Pluto. Oh, Pluto's been a problem ever since he went into Capricorn because it's all about reforming structures. So he's been in Capricorn since 2008. We don't have much longer. I can't remember off the top of my head when Pluto moves out of Capricorn into Aquarius, but it'll be rebuilding. Everything that Pluto has turned to rubbish will be rebuilt differently, better. Pluto's job is to rework what doesn't work anymore. So that's like his job. It's transformative energy, and it's about power, structure. So when it moves into Aquarius, it'll be, okay, it's all gone. So what are we going to put in its place, and how are we going to make it better? So soon. Yeah, we'll all be like feeling a lot better.
That would be awesome. Yeah. This the whole thing is so fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain all of this to me.
No problem. I love talking about astrology. I mean, it's, like I said, it's my jam. So I just love talking about it. If anybody has any questions, they can reach me through my website.
Okay.
That's www.essentialzodiac.com. I'm on Facebook. Essential Zodiac has a page there, so you can reach me there. If anybody has any questions, I love feedback. and it would be awesome. So,
Yeah.
and thank you, Nicole. I mean, this has been great. I love, um, like I said, I love to talk about astrology. I could be here for hours. So,
Yeah. And I totally appreciate that. Yeah. It
yeah,
has.
anytime, just give me a call. We'll do it again.
Okay. Yeah. When something big is about to happen, like some big planetary movement that's going to affect everybody, just
Yeah, well,
shoot me a message.
maybe I can come back in December and we could talk about what's going to be happening in 2022.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, yeah. I always do. Um, okay, here's what's happening for the new year, and people love that. And that, we just go through, especially if anything big is happening.
Right.
So yeah, yeah. So I always do it. I have last year and the year before, they published me in Yes Weekly.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. It was really cool. They like called me up and it's like, I'm like, yeah, sure. It was, 2019 and 2020. So it was pretty cool. So yeah, I could come back in December and we could talk about 2022.
I think that would be awesome. And in the meantime, I am going to put a link to your website in the show notes to make it easy for anybody who's listening
Oh,
to
wonderful. Thank
find
you.
you. You're welcome.
Great.
And thanks again. This has been awesome.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Thanks again to Cynthia for taking time to talk with me today. And thank you for listening. If you have an idea for a show topic, you can fill out the contact form at peeppodcast.com. That's PEEP podcast.com. Remember, that stands for People Experiencing Everyday Paranormal. If I can find a study about it, I'll be happy to use it. Also, if you're interested in sharing your own personal stories of paranormal experiences, I'd love to have you on the show. It can be as anonymous as you'd like. You can keep up with the show on its Facebook page, facebook.com/peeppodcast. We also have a growing group linked from that page in case you're interested in joining the conversation over there. If you like the podcast, please give it some rating love on your favorite podcast app, share it with friends, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Doing so will help the podcast be found by others. Special thanks to everyone who has given the show some love. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting the show financially, I've set up a Patreon page at patreon.com/Nicole Maroc. Patrons will receive special thanks and some para-nerd perks. No matter how you support the show, listening, telling others about it, Patreon, or any other way, I truly appreciate you being here. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe and be well.